Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome to Late Night Learning. I am your host, Dr. Anthony Palomba. So today we're going to be in the second phase, if you will, of an academic research breakdown. And so earlier in the last video, we went through an introduction, a lit review, theories, variables, and operationalization of variables. And so if you're a masochist for punishment, you're in the right place because we're going to keep going on this boat down the academic literature stream. Let's get started. And so I talked about in the last video the idea of what a variable is, and just kind of this notion that a variable is meant to measure certain variation within a process, hoping to support or unsupport a theory. And so when you are writing a lit review, assuming some of you who are watching this are eager to understand how to write a lit review, how to understand a lit review, how do we understand this boring, dry, academic stuff, you want to think about linkages. You want to think about how can I link one paragraph with the other. If you can do these things well, and if you can do these things with great focus and sharpness and conviction, you're going to be a damn good writer. You will. By doing this, there are a few things you have to consider. For one, make sure your topic sentence refers to the previous variable. If I am talking about intent to purchase, or if I'm talking about brand loyalty, and if I have intent to purchase as one variable followed by brand loyalty, the topic sentence in brand loyalty should reference intent to purchase. Intent to purchase is an important variable that underscores people's interest in purchasing, which is supported by the amount of brand loyalty they may have toward a brand. There's your linkage between intent to purchase and brand loyalty. Now, when you wrap up a variable, the final sentence in that paragraph should link to some extent with the next variable that's going to be spoken about. I promise you, journal editors look for this. When they're trying to evaluate whether or not to make a publication out of your study, they want to make sure it flows. They're looking for flow. And guess what? They're not reading all 20 pages the first time. They're looking at topic sentences just to even see, is this even a waste of my time or not? Additionally, if you are writing one, you want to be sure that you can write about the dependent variables first. Why? Why would you write about the dependent variables first? Well, with the dependent variables, you're going to be having hypotheses about which variables are impacted by what variables. If you can talk about the dependent variables first, when you bring up the independent variables, then you could put out hypotheses and research questions because you've already defined the dependent variables. If your dependent variable is brand loyalty, and then you start talking about gender, and then you start talking about household income, and then you start talking about actor familiarity and how these three variables might link and impact brand loyalty, now we can start talking about those variables because you've already operationalized and discussed the dependent variable. It is a really keen way to help consolidate and strengthen and empower your article so that people can really follow you along. Do not assume that just because an academic is reading your article, he or she knows what you're talking about, he or she is familiar with the topic. Far from it. Far from it. You know the most about your own article that you put out. As such, guide your reader by the hand. Guide your reader by the hand. Let's go back to the slide. And so, really for each independent variable, there should be two things that are discussed. The first paragraph should explain the variable and operationalize it, as we know, is what the definition is for that variable. It should discuss findings in other studies surrounding the variable and how this may be related to the present study. The second paragraph should serve as a link between an independent variable and a dependent variable. It should be written to justify and lead up to the research question or hypothesis that is being investigated. If, in my second paragraph, I start talking about how actor familiarity can impact and lead to brand loyalty, I can start talking about, well, consumers who are interested in, Will Smith or Leo DiCaprio, they're going to go see his movies or their movies. And so if they're seeing their movies over and over again, we can assume that there might be some sort of attitudinal loyalty here. And then I can cite a few studies that supports that. And so if attitudinal loyalty is used here, and if consumers are viewing actors over and over again in certain select movies, then it follows that actor familiarity should be a significant predictor of brand loyalty. You can kind of start seeing how I'm getting toward that, right? We're starting with actor familiarity and brand loyalty. We sift, and then at the bottom, we're going to have a research question. We're going to have a hypothesis. We'll have something, because we've led up to what we're trying to discuss. That's key here when we're talking about how to properly construct an academic article. Let's go to the next slide. And so with research questions and hypotheses, since I've brought them up, a research question is meant to be exploratory in nature. What don't we really know about? When I was doing a study on how consumers actively manage their emotions, there wasn't a lot of literature. It's kind of stumped, actually. I didn't have a lot of studies to go off on. And so I had to say to myself, well, okay, I might have to write some research questions, because frankly, there's just not a lot of previous studies for me to go on. Is there a number that you should follow in figuring out if you should write a research question or hypothesis? No, there isn't. You may have to make a judgment call. Do I have enough evidence to make a hypothesis, to state the relationship that I believe to be true among two or more variables? That is what a hypothesis is. Or am I really reticent to make a claim between relationships between two variables or more? Because I'm not really sure which variable impacts what variable, or even what that relationship might look like. I don't really have a lot of evidence to go on. I have to think differently. And so, as you can see here, as a hypothesis might sound, is Nintendo video game console brand personality perceptions will have a positive impact on Nintendo brand loyalty. That is to say, if consumers really feel like certain Nintendo brand personality traits that have already been determined through another analysis are indicative of Nintendo, might that lead to brand loyalty? I felt confident saying this because there's plenty of literature on how brand personality traits impact brand loyalty. And brand personality traits being, well, I think Starbucks is cool, sexy, sophisticated, liberal, conservative, youthful, joyful, rugged, Western, sophisticated, masculine, feminine. Those are brand personality traits. The more that we feel a brand is indicative of certain brand personality traits that have already been determined, then we know that it's likely going to trigger brand loyalty, because there's a consistency principle there, isn't there? I keep thinking and perceiving Nintendo to be joyful, whimsical, and all of these things. That's going to push me toward having greater brand loyalty toward the brand, because I keep playing with it, I keep seeing consistent quality, and it's a reliable kind of quality. And I start building a love for the brand. That's how you separate the differences between research questions and hypotheses. Let's move along. Designing hypotheses. So, a hypothesis is first and foremost a statement about a relationship. Your goals shouldn't state whether or not there is a direct relationship or an indirect relationship. For instance, an indirect relationship might be, well, as the temperature goes down, the amount of clothing I wear will go up. Now, that might be a poorly worded hypothesis, and I agree with you on that, but nevertheless, that's an indirect relationship. As one variable subsides, the other one increases. As it gets colder, I wear more clothing. As it gets hotter, I wear less clothing. That would be an indirect relationship that you can test with a hypothesis. A direct relationship may be, the harder I study, the better I do on an assignment. Probably, once again, we might need to word that better, but that's the general idea. The harder I study, the better I do with my work. Simple. Simple as that. Let's go back to the slide. It is a bolder statement from a research question, as there is more literature to support a hypothesis. This is up to you. There's no standard here. You have to determine if you feel confident enough to state a hypothesis or you'd rather do a research question. It is up to you. There is no standard. Let's move along. Examples of hypotheses. Aggregate 7th generation video game console brand personality perceptions. That's a mouthful and I will define it. Will have a positive impact on aggregate 7th generation video game console brand loyalty. Another one. High brand loyalty video game players who perceive that they have high emotional intelligence will be more likely to seek gratifications. And finally, perceived relative advantage of mobile news will be positively related to the adoption of mobile news. So for the top one, I was interested in this. This was a study I did. Aggregate, meaning the brand personalities that were most indicative of the 7th generation video game consoles across the PlayStation 3, across the Xbox 360, across the Nintendo Wii U. Those perceptions would have a positive impact on aggregate or total brand loyalty across all three consoles. That's what I was trying to get at there. For the second one, I was interested in high perceived emotional intelligence, the idea of being aware of your own emotions. What is your perceived emotional intelligence? How aware do you think you are of your own emotions? How conscious are you of your own emotions? And then finally, with perceived relative advantage of mobile news, how do you perceive mobile news to be advantageous and how this might impact your adoption of mobile news? These are important things to think about when we think about hypotheses because, again, they give our study direction. That's one of the biggest things about research questions and hypotheses. They limit us in scope to what we can generalize, to what we can tease out, to what kind of transferability might exist in a study, or what kind of causality we might find. Hypotheses and research questions help keep us grounded, and they help keep our research studies focused. And so they're very, very crucial. Let's move along. Mediation. Some of you might need a mediation if you're in a dispute. It's a little different here in academia. A mediator offers reason or is the missing link between two variables. So, the relationship between study effort and grade earned on an exam will be mediated by method of study. We are arguing here that method of study is a necessary step. It has to occur in this process. The study effort cannot be done without the method of study. You could argue that this might moderate the relationship instead, and we'll go over moderation in a second. But when you study, you have to determine a kind of study habit. You have to have a style, don't you? As a result, this is a necessary step in how grade earned on test will occur. And so you could argue that method of study is a mediator as a result. But not all variables that are involved with one another deal with being a necessary step. Sometimes they might indirectly impact a relationship. Let's take a look. Differently with moderation, a moderator influences the relationship between two variables. Now, with study effort and the grade on the exam, we don't necessarily need hours of sleep, right? We could take an exam after 3 days of not sleeping. Not recommended, but according to this, it's something that probably indirectly influences a relation or directly influences a relationship between two variables, but is otherwise not directly related, so to speak. So the more hours of sleep you might have here might impact the relationship between study effort and grade on exam. You might study really hard, but if you're not getting enough hours of sleep, that might still hurt how well you do on the exam. Differently, if you study very little, but if you're getting excellent amounts of sleep, you actually still might be okay taking that exam. You're up, you're alert. It might help you. Knowing mediation and moderation is incredibly important, especially when we think of experiments. And we might try to control for gender, or we might try to think of other variables that might impact relationships with variables. Let's move along. Designing research questions. This is important to do. When you're designing a research question, you really want to think about how and does as starting points for your research question. It's a really nice way to structure your research question because it allows kind of an open-endedness. How does playing video games that are violence-based impact brand loyalty toward a video game console? Or does playing certain video game genres instill more brand loyalty onto a video game console? If so, how? If so, why? You can take one of those two questions at the end and you can slap it onto the back of a research question. You can say, if so, how, or if so, why. This allows you to really allow for an expansive investigation into what is going on with the particular study. Let's move along. Further examples of research questions. So these are questions that are really interested in examining what is going on. What motivations do consumers have for watching news content? What specific motivations for watching video content affect consumers' perceived substitutability between online video platforms and television? Do users and non-users of online video platforms differ in how they perceive the substitutability between online video platforms and television? Note, for every does or do question, place if so at the end. It brings clarity and depth, as we have said before. Let's move along. What is statistical significance? This highlights a relationship or correlation that is very likely to occur and is not due to error. It may not be due to random choice. The P, if you're reading an academic article, stands for the probability of error. A significance level of 0.01 indicates evidence to reject the null hypothesis. Otherwise meaning we reject the idea that there is no statistically significant relationship. That means something is happening here. We have a relationship. Something statistically significant is happening here. So in other words, we want a very low P level, as low as we can get. The P level considers an observed result similar to what is seen if the null hypothesis is true. If the P value is less than 0.05, we can successfully reject the null hypothesis. There is only 5% error here. That is what P 0.05 means, If the P value is greater than or equal to 0.05. We do not reject the null hypothesis. We accept there is no statistically significant relationship present among the variables. And that's how we roll in the social sciences. And really, it is subjective. You could argue that. Some journals will accept 0.10 as an okay p-value. It is exceptionally rare. But it is a standard in which we have all kind of agreed upon. This is how we want to create knowledge upon. You will see these numbers especially in surveys, content analyses, data mining, and experiments in particular. Let's move along. So, as I said, the p-level should be at 0.001, 0.01, or 0.05 levels. It's good to round your p-values. Make sure to do that. Most journals will not accept any more than 3 spaces. You do need 3 spaces, though, for the 0.001 significance. That's important. If a statistical software tells you that it is significant at the 0.00 level, put in 0.001. That data is being rounded up, or rounded down for that matter. You don't want 0.00. Always put 0.001 when you see 0.00. We usually use one-tailed tests of significance. It indicates a directionality to what we are examining. So when you run a regression or something of that ilk, you may very well say to yourself, I'm going to run a one-tailed test of significance. Two-tailed test, it tests for any kind of relationship. It's usually done with t-tests, usually done with correlations that are really just looking for any kind of relationship between 2 variables. And it is often kind of exploratory in nature for that matter. Well, that's all the time we have today on Late Night Learning. As always, keep laughing and keep learning.